Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. Welcome to episode. What are we on, Bullet? Bullet? No, he's on the bed sleeping. Welcome to episode 106. Okay, guys, back again. Again, I feel like I repeat myself so many times with this because of finding guests, and it always seems to, Podmatch and Instagram and these sites that I use have really, given me a plethora of different, not even just people with disabilities, but just amazing guests that offer a lot to the audience. And, I really am thankful that I've found that site. Among all the other things that I've gotten into. And it really is getting to the point now where I don't really have to find guests as much. Usually they come to me now, which is, I'm very grateful. As far as our next guest, I don't remember who reached out to who, but we had a long conversation the other day, and it was really nice just to talk to somebody who, first time I ever met them, and, it's not even that we had a lot in common, or we agreed with each other and everything. It was just refreshing to know there's someone out there fighting and overcoming and just trying to do good in this world. And so I obviously wanted to have her on, and we finally got our schedules to match up. So do you want to tell us your name, obviously, and a little about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Juliet Rose. I'm a writer. I write fiction. I've written over the years. I've actually written nonfiction as well, based on, my own experiences in life. I actually had a child that had cancer, had a brain tumor, and she did pass in 1999. And so I took a hiatus for a while from writing during that time, just to, heal and reflect, and really came back to it this year. I personally don't have a disability. I do have an autoimmune disorder I live with. And then my husband has cerebral palsy. So we're definitely familiar with living in a world where maybe things aren't quite designed to support, our own growth, and we adapt.
Yeah. No, and, one of the things that I've focused on this second year of doing this is also talking to people who have done a lot for people with disabilities, and not just like in advocating, but like caregivers. Obviously you had to take care of your child, and, you have your husband and so on, but, and I know you do have a condition yourself, but it's not always just necessarily about the disability. It's just, also the people that are impacted by it, because one of the things that kind of gets overshadowed is the people who are affected by it. And they're not usually affected by it in a positive way. I mean, maybe they're inspired by the person, their child or lover or whatever, but to, be stronger. But in general, it's a lot of work, especially, whether it's, special needs children or just people who are in wheelchairs and their parents have to take care of them. It's a lot on them, or the significant other. It's not as easy, just because it's hard for the person in the wheelchair or whatever their condition is. It doesn't mean it's easy for the person on the other side of it either.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think that, having my child, she had a brain tumor, so she required a lot of care. And so, not just the physical side of it, but the mental side of getting up every day, and you love that person so much and you really want them to have the best life possible too. So there's that aspect of mentally feeling drained 100% of the time, because you're wanting to give everything in you to help them have the best life possible as well.
Yeah.
So there's definitely the side of being a caregiver. There's a lot of beauty in it. I mean, I would never trade any of the experiences that I've had.
Yeah.
But it is a lot. It is a lot physically. It is a lot mentally. There's a lot of adaptation that you have to think about that most people don't think about in everyday life. And I think I mentioned this to you, TJ. My husband talks about, which he has cerebral palsy. If he broke his left arm, he wouldn't be able to get out of the house because he couldn't turn a doorknob. So it's like, simple things like that you have to think about constantly. In your life is, adjusted around that to make sure that the quality of life for everybody is as best as it.
Right. But I bet that makes you a lot more empathetic, and it gives you more knowledge on what other people could go through, because these are things that you probably couldn't have fathomed without having to meet people like this, whether it's your child or your lover. Because is he your husband or your fiance,
He's my husband.
husband.
Yeah,
Okay, so like without that, like you probably wouldn't even consider, certain things that he has to do or to overcome. He has to, he has to alternate everything in his life for it to work for him. And obviously, you're lucky enough that some of those things he has to do, you don't have to do. But the fact that you get to witness it, you have the experience and the knowledge of knowing, like, okay, like, because you may have to do some things. When you're done doing something, maybe you have to fix it, or you have to leave something in your house that works for him, because you may do something that impacts him in a negative way, and so.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it keeps you going, and like I said, it makes you more empathetic. Because it's one thing to have a child, because especially as a mother, you have a kid, and you automatically just want to save this thing and make sure it has the best life possible. But when you're actually connected and married to somebody, you say for better or for worse. And again, a lot of people don't really know what that means. They just say it, and then
Right.
you realize.
Exactly.
And obviously, you signed up for this. You obviously knew he had cerebral palsy before you married him, but still, when you move in with somebody and you're with them all the time, you see a lot of other things that you probably didn't pick up on in the beginning.
Exactly. There's things you just don't even realize are an issue, or are something that they have to face as a challenge. It's, we talk about things like that, hanging a picture on the wall. That's something that's what I do, because that's something that he can't do. And that's, conversations that come up on a daily basis. These are things I didn't think about. My daughter had, similar issues because of the brain tumor. So she had weakness on her left side of her body. So she couldn't do certain things. She was, she had she used everything on her right side, my husband used his left side. So, I saw things with her, but when you're taking care of a child, like you said, you're taking care of a child, you're expected to kind of take care of everything anyway. But when you're with another adult and they're dealing with challenges, it's something you won't think about until you really see it. And then you go, oh, didn't even cross the mind, and I think that's the thing with disability. A lot of people, they either undercompensate or they overcompensate. And that's not something I want to do either. My husband's a powerful person. He's strong. He plays disc golf. He's a musician. Like he brings everything to the table. So he doesn't need me to take care of him, but he needs is someone that understands what he can and can't do, and just be present when I need to be and not be present when I don't, also understanding that, he wants to do things for himself. He doesn't need me overcompensating, and rushing in to do things, So I think that's the side of disability a lot of times people forget about, is that, people with disabilities aren't incapable, and that's something you tend to people, they do the pity thing, they do the inspire thing. That's not lending to the quality of life of somebody with a disability.
Right. Well, like the unconditional love that you give is very, even if there's days where he can't express it, it is very impactful, and it's really important for him to have from you, because, again, I don't know everything he can and can't do, but just from my point of view, like, one of the things I have to admit as a 33-year-old person, I can't drive. And so when I'm out in the dating world trying to find people, there's girls that'll say in their profiles, like, I need you to have a job, this, and this. And I go, oh, I have all that. And then there's one thing they say, well, I need you to have your own car and you need to drive. And it's like, it doesn't take away from me being a man and being a person, but there's these little nuggets where you see and you go like, oh, like, yeah, I don't have that. And you have to deal with it. And again, eventually you get over it and you get through it because you're just used to life. But there's always these little like tripwires that you step over and you just go like, shit. Because we don't always know every limitation we have. Like, obviously I know I can't drive, but sometimes there might have been a time where I didn't think about like, yes, that would have impacted my dating life. And so, and so when he actually has somebody who, obviously he doesn't have to worry about dating, but he has many other issues, and he doesn't have to worry about someone, the person he's laying next to every night, judging him. Like, he knows that you genuinely care about him no matter what, and even if you don't fully understand, because you probably can't, he knows that you're willing to understand, you're willing to listen, and that's like super important in any relationship.
And I think that's important too, I don't understand, and I don't pretend to. I don't pretend that I understand, because I'm married to somebody that has a disability. I don't pretend to understand disability because I don't live with it. And sometimes I'll think about it. Like, sometimes I'm laying in bed and I'll think about what it's like to walk around in his skin, what he has to deal with, and try to really be more empathetic and think about, the things that, maybe I get frustrated with, are the things that I can do easily, and then I'm just like, now I have to go do that. And then I have to remind myself, you know what, I don't know what it's, you know, I live with somebody with a disability. I'm not somebody with a disability. There's a big difference. And I think that people need to recognize that as well and respect those differences.
Right. But the fact that you even want to try to put yourself in those shoes is really awesome because, you know, it may sound like fucked up, but like the fact that you kind of want to figure out what it's like to be us is important because not many people do, because we are a huge, as I've said many times on here, we're a huge reminder of how fucked up life can get.
Right.
And I think a lot of people just think like, oh, you become disabled by birth defects or all these different things. And it's like, no, like you can get into a car accident and you're paralyzed, you know,
Exactly.
just because you have a disability doesn't mean you can't have a disability again. You know, I may be legally blind. That doesn't mean my ears can't go. That doesn't mean I can't get into a car accident or be shot, or not to make this just a dark podcast, but you know, anything can happen to me where I could fall off the table or something, you know, why I'm on the table, I don't know. But, you know, but it's like, yeah, like we're a huge reminder of like, again, how life can really be hard. But again, we're always the ones that have been perceived to be the broken ones, but we're the ones that are always trying to fix people and try to fix the world. And there's something really, not something, there's a lot of beauty in that. But there's also a lot of pain and anger and sadness that goes with having a disability, because the hardest part of having a disability is not the disability itself. It's how we're treated and all the hurdles that we have to try to overcome just to have a civil life like everyone else.
Right. Right. And that's a burden that you shouldn't have to bear. And in, you know, living in a society, I feel like, you know, there's a lot lacking, I think, in our education system. But one of the things I feel is lacking is that kids really aren't given lessons or really kind of exposed to things that teach empathy, that teach to think about what other people are going through. They'll touch on it sometimes, but they really tend to just glaze over it. You know, even the sense of like having special classes and then separating students, you know, like in other cultures, that isn't necessarily the case. And I feel like that's one thing here is I feel like everything is still kind of very separated. And you know, I see it. I'll go with my husband and I'll see the way sometimes people look at him. Pisses me off, you know, I'll be honest. You know, because it's one of those things where, like, how does someone think that that's okay? You know, how does someone think that it's acceptable? And I saw it with my daughter. I would take her in, you know, to the store, and she, you know, when she was on chemo, she didn't have hair. But even after chemo, you know, her eyes crossed, and she had, you know, the right both-sided weakness. And so, you know, she was different. And adults would stop and stare and point and whisper. And, you know, and I would sometimes confront them, but it was hard because I also didn't want to bring it to her attention that they were doing that. So it was just really a challenge of being like, I really want to call these people out for what they're doing, but also my daughter's not aware right now, and I don't want to bring that to her attention and have it hurt her. Yeah. But it always surprised me that grown adults would act that way towards people that were different than them. You know, but again, I think it comes down to like, that is still how disability is viewed in this country. It's still viewed as, you know, less than, or like you said, broken, and it's not. Like, it's just different. You're just bringing a different skill set to the table. And I wish people could just see that and allow for the adaptations, which are often really simple adaptations, so you put into place at work, at schools, etc.
Right. Yeah, it's like this freakish thing, like we should be in circuses or whatever. I mean, you got the people who swallow swords and maybe they're missing an arm and they do weird things with it, whatever. But that's a specific trait that they, you know, they focus on and they do crazy things with. But overall, it's just like we're just regular people that are just struggling with whatever it is that's going on in our bodies. And again, some are more visible than others as well. Some people can hide it. But that doesn't mean they're not going through a lot of shit. And that's also the mental health part that I also talk about. Not just the chronic illnesses and all the things that are going on deep inside, but the mental shit. There's people that are just battling things and just, they're putting on these fake smiles and, you know, you're laughing at them because whatever. And it's like, man, like you got to try. And again, we all have our bad days. We're not always the best person. We're always not our best selves. We may go to the store and someone just cuts us off, or, you know, we may say something horrible or whatever, but end of the day, like when you see someone who actually is going through something and like try to care, even if you don't acknowledge them, don't laugh at them, don't look at them and stare, like just try to be a human. Because it seems like the only time people understand what it's like to be that, or you know, just to kind of comprehend it is and be compassionate to her, is if they have a child or they are that person or they know someone that they love that's like that. But if they don't have anybody in their life, or you know, that's not at least of importance to them, that has a disability, it's just kind of like, oh, it's that thing over there. And yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, it's something I've always said. It's like you shouldn't have to have something happen to you or to someone you love to care about it. Like caring is a natural human condition. Children care about one another. You'll see them do that. And somewhere along the way, we put up all these walls and decide what we are capable of caring about. And so, like, discomfort, when people feel uncomfortable, then they feel like they can't, like they shut themselves off, or worse, then they have to act out, which is like laughing or pointing or whispering. Right. But like, when people feel uncomfortable in some way, they shut themselves off instead of just saying, I have the capability to be a caring person and to care about this person, despite what I'm uncomfortable with. And I think that's, again, it's something that, children have it naturally. So if we would just continue that conversation as people grow up, I think that we would see a lot more, open-mindedness when people are adults, and versus now where they're just like so uncomfortable. Like they're so uncomfortable with anything that's different. I was in the store last night with my dog. She's an adult now, and we're walking, and she was just wearing these handmade leg warmers a friend had made for her, and they're big and they're pink and they're really cute, something like that. And these kids in front of her just kept staring, turning around, staring, and whispering amongst each other. And it's like, it's that discomfort because she's different. She's comfortable with her differentness. They weren't. Like they couldn't accept it. Like she was confident. She was just doing her thing, whatever, I'm comfortable. But they were uncomfortable because of that difference and that they couldn't do that. And I feel that's where we're losing, kind of like this conversation is somewhere in those teen years, somewhere around, 10 to 12, where we're just, then, they're not bringing these conversations up in schools anymore. They're not, everything kind of becomes separated and encapsulated starting really at that age. And then by the time they get to adulthood, they don't know what to do when they're uncomfortable. They just don't. So they act out.
Right. Well, it's kind of like, we have Black history. We have certain histories where we just go like Native American history. We have certain histories where we go like, okay, we can point to a part in time where we go, okay, that was wrong and we need to change this and that. Well, there's really no, even kind of like with gay history too, like there's just this renaissance now, not starting now, but like not too long ago, like we didn't know what gay people were. There was just like a couple of them out there and it was like, okay, there's a couple people that do this one thing that we feel that's unholy or whatever. And it's like, okay. And then now it's like, not only is there gay people, like there's so many different variations and different genders and all that. Well, when it comes to like disability history, other than what we learned in like that documentary Crip Camp or what happened in the 90s and all these people fighting for us, like we don't really have any real history because we were so, even though there was disabled people all through history, it was never perceived to be that. There was no labels. There was none of that. And now we're in 2022 now. And yes, we've gotten a lot better because not every person with a disability is put into some camp and they're not all mistreated, and people with disabilities are allowed to have lives and allowed to function and go regular places like everyone else is, but it's still way far behind every other community because if the Black community was treated like the disability community, there would be a huge outcry. And and again, in fairness to that community, Black people actually fight for what their problems are.
And that's what I was going to say. What you've seen, and my daughter's gay, so we've talked a lot too about kind of like that thing. And like she's aware of gay history now. Like she talks about it, and she's out there, and she's verbal about it. And I think that's part of what it is, and that's why I love that you're doing this podcast. It's because people want people to sit in silence and not speak about their suffering, speak about their history, speak about what they demand for themselves. And what you've seen with different like people of color and the LGBT community is that they're like, excuse my language, but fuck that. I'm not doing it anymore. Like I'm going to stand up and say I deserve these rights. This is what we've been through. This is what we want. And I'm really passionate, obviously, for the disability community to do this as well, to say, you know what? This is what we demand. This is what we've been through. And I mean, we've seen things. My husband and I remember one time we were watching a program, and it wasn't even a program about disabilities. It was a program, I think, like one of those ghost shows. And they were in this old, institution, and they were going through, and they kind of talked about history about it. And they were talking about how children with disabilities were like chained to sinks and stuff because, they would hurt themselves or whatever. And they actually showed little videos, and it was really, really painful. Like, you even speak about it now. It's really painful because that was how disability was used. Like, these children were just nothing. They were to be just disposed of and locked into these places. And then in the places they were abused and often, killed. And like these histories need to come out, like what people with disabilities have gone through to get to a place of acceptance is just as hard as any other community. And of course you have communities, people that have done both, people of color that are also disabled, that are trying to fight for those rights. So I think ultimately, like, your podcast and like my husband, he speaks out and he's out there. He's, he makes sure people, when they see him, he's Justin and they know him, and I think that's what it is you have to really just say, I'm present, I'm here, and you're going to pay attention to me. And you're going to hear about the horrible things that my community went through. And the disability community went through horrible things. And if you really start to dig into the history, you'll want to vomit. It's so horrible, And I think that's what's important is having that voice and using it.
Yeah, because there's not a lot of imagery. Because, like, we know, like, if you just say Holocaust and slavery, like, that hits you. You know what that means. You have imagery of that, even if it's in black and white and it's old. But we know what people went through during those times. But we don't really, you can say what you just said, and it's like, oh, okay, that happened. It's as if, like, yeah, okay, well, that sucks, but, I got shit to do. There's not a lot that's focused towards people with disabilities because, even though we are a huge minority, we're a minority and we're not a very vocal minority. And a lot of us are still trying to figure out if we're proud to even be that. Some of us are so ashamed. I think we all have a little bit of shame, even including me. Like, we have a little shame of being disabled because, life kind of treats us that way and shows us that we should be. And it's not true, but it's hard every day to be strong because you have to be strong. Because, again, there's a lot of people that are in my life that don't have disabilities, and they look at me, and if I start showing weakness, including like my grandmother, every time I'm down, I try not to show my depression around her because I know it impacts her and it really saddens her, even though she's a hardened woman who's grew up in the 1930s and she was poor and, but she sees me and it does affect her. And other people as well. And I try not to, but my life isn't easy all the time, and it's never easy, but I make it easier than it is. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm always happy to see people with disabilities overcoming and doing so much, but we have so far to go. And I say this ad nauseum that 75% of us are unemployed. And it's like, if 75% of any community in this country was unemployed, there would be riots. And this is the only community that's allowed to have that. And I think one of the things that I think sucks, especially in modern time right now, is we're so divided in every single way because my stupid phone off. We're so divided because of all the media and all the shit that we're told we're not supposed to like each other. And this goes racially, sexually, all that nonsense. That we're not supposed to like each other. But when you think about it, like, there's all these communities that are fighting for their causes. But it doesn't seem like there's many crossovers. As I've said many times, I think I see a lot of people with disabilities fighting for Black Lives Matter and Me Too and all that, but then they forget about their own cause because a lot of people aren't coming back to their cause.
I would say you don't see the flip side sometimes. Yeah, you don't see, people of other organizations saying, okay, now we have to really, and my husband and I have had this conversation because he expresses exactly what you expressed, the frustration of feeling someone invisible as a minority, as a group that deserves that attention. And, and I was going to say earlier, like, it's a double whammy too, because not only are you dealing with the disability, you're dealing with the mental illness along with that disability. So, and you like that, you feel like you have to show you're strong because that's what people want to see. It's that inspire thing. Like, that just makes me cringe. Like, oh, they're such an inspiration.
Yeah.
My husband doesn't exist, and you don't exist to inspire somebody else. You exist for your own purposes, to walk your own path and live your own life and do what your life is laid out for you.
Right.
And if you want to show that you're frustrated, if you want to show that you can't do something, if you want to be depressed and show that to people, you have that right. And nobody has the right to be like, oh, that makes me uncomfortable. To that. Like, ultimately, mental illness in this country is so, like, still shamed. And so then you're dealing with two shames. You're dealing with the shame of what people expect from somebody with a disability, and you're dealing with what people expect from mental illness. And it's not fair. I mean, you have the right to say, I've had enough. I deserve to speak my mind. I deserve to be heard. We as a group deserve adaptations. Like, you have the right to go to any job and say, make it work, because we do it for anybody else. And so like that's what jobs should have to do. They should have to fall into an expectation that if somebody comes in and they're blind, somebody comes in and they're deaf, somebody comes in and they have cerebral palsy, etc., that there's an adaptation to help them do that job.
Right. Yeah, and we're just we're very vulnerable. We're not protected at all. Like even with the job that I have, I go out and I fill vending machines. Outside the podcast, I fill vending machines at these rest areas and so on. And I deal with some nice people every so often, but there's a lot of times I'm carrying heavy shit and no one wants to hold the door for me. They leave the door right in my face and whatever. Yeah, it pisses me off. And again, I don't think that's because I'm disabled. That's just because they're ignorant people. But, I've had, I remember one occasion where a guy, I was trying to give him change, and I guess I gave him one of the gold dollars, and I meant to give him a quarter, and he just like put it in my face, was like, no, this is a gold dollar. And I'm like, I just wanted to cold cock him because I was so pissed. But again, I have to care about my job. I also have not to get arrested for hitting a person. But it's like, I can't prove, how do I prove to HR in my company? Again, HR is way, miles and miles back. But how do I prove to HR that the reason why I screamed at this person was because I was so pissed off because someone treated me like garbage and treated me like something that was less than because he put it in my face. It's like, yes, you could kind of prove that, but they don't care about that shit. That's not like, unless they call you some sort of word, which is what nowadays what triggers people. People I know people with disabilities, a lot of it is so subliminal how we're treated. And it's not, unless they come out and say, hey, you broken leg fuck, and this, unless they specifically say that, they can't, you can't prove it. And so, you have to just take it. And that's why a lot of us end up blowing up and just completely just getting pissed off. And the mental health stuff goes into it. And it's like, oh, see, now we got to put him in a straitjacket because he's angry. And it's like, yeah, I have every fucking right to be angry, man. I'm tired. Like, life has kicked me around. And for once, I just want to have a nice interaction with a person. Here's your quarters. Right. Here's your snack. And good luck to you. Have a nice new year. Not, shove this shit in my face. It's just a lot we have to deal with beyond the disability, and that's what a lot of people don't tend to understand or want to recognize, that the disability is hard. I think there's so much more.
Growing up and seeing kids with disabilities in my school and seeing how they were treated, and then as an adult, it is very subliminal. It's very much like it is points and the stares and the whispers and it is hard stuff to like nail down and say, they did this to me, this is what they said, because a lot of times it isn't, but it's just as hurtful. It's just as damaging, especially for kids in school who they're forming at that time and they're trying to learn about the world, and the world is really unkind. When you have a disability and you have, other kids that are doing things every day. And, as a writer, that's something I try to bring into my stories. All of my stories have some level of challenges. And in the one that I have coming out in May with Adelaide, one of the main characters, he's deaf. He's a dog handler and deals with anger issues. And the reason I wanted to do this, because my husband's dealt with anger issues. I'm sure you've dealt with anger issues. I think it's really common when you don't feel heard to be pissed. And so, I really wanted to bring that into a story and kind of go through that history of feeling that way and feeling really angry and not knowing how to express it, because I feel like this is an area, again, that we're not addressing. Bullying is chronic anyway in this country in schools, but I feel like when you're dealing with a disability, it's almost expected from the adults around you. So while they're like, don't do that, that's wrong, you shouldn't do that, I feel like it's not being addressed by the adults the way that it should be, because it shouldn't be dealt with just because it happened at this moment. It should be dealt with all the time. This is these conversations that need to be had. But again, we have adults that can't handle seeing somebody with a disability. Yeah. They like I said, they act stupid. And so for them to be leading children or trying to teach children how to, work with somebody with a disability, it's almost impossible because they have their own preconceived ideas in their head. Right. And with my daughter, I remember taking her to a playgroup when she was little, and, she was really bright, and, she was just like every other kid. She just had a disability. And so, I remember taking her, and she couldn't get off the couch, say, to play with the other kids. She really had a hard time with balance and stuff. And I remember, so it was awkward. So I sat with her, and we were drawing together and talking, and one of the moms looks up and goes, "Oh, she's actually really smart." I thought, right. Yeah, why wouldn't she be? In my mind, I couldn't understand. And I thought, oh, you're looking at her disability and assuming she's stupid, which was so offensive, but then how do you cross that line with people? How do you say you're an idiot for thinking that my child's stupid? because you don't understand what a disability is, So it was one of those situations where, I should have, again, didn't draw attention to it because I was with my child and I didn't want her feeling like, there was a scene being caused because of her. Yeah. But I never went back to playgroup because it was one of those things where it's just like, I was so shocked at that reaction by this parent that I ended up backing off and taking my child away because I didn't want her to feel exposed. But those are the issues that need to be addressed. Is why do we feel this way about people with disabilities? Why have we created this reality that somehow, like you were saying earlier, that they're broken or that they're not smart or whatever? Like, my husband told me a story about one time going for a job and the guy's like, "Oh, can you push a broom?" And then they'd improve it. And it was just one of those things where I was like, oh my God, I would have flipped out, but I know exactly why he didn't, because at the time he was shocked and embarrassed that he was being asked to do it, so he did it.
Yeah.
But he was pissed. Like, inside he was pissed, so he took that anger out of that situation and carried it into the rest of his life because he's pissed that he has to justify himself all the time.
Well, but he also, if he wants that job or he wants a job, because things are more limited for people with disabilities, he has to endure that. He has to take that shit.
Right.
And that's how things blow up, because I had something very similar to what he went through, where I went to and I don't even know why, I was just wanted a job. And it was one of these like call centers. And, it was one of these places where they say, well, if you come here, you don't have to apply online. Like, that's like their whole little ploy to get you there. Yet you have to take a test when you get there. So I'm like, okay. So I sit down at the computer and she's just like, here you go. And I'm like, miss, can I put some sort of magnification like every computer has? And she's like, oh no, well, it's locked out of that. Like this computer is only set to do this one thing. So I'm like, so you won't allow me to have any magnification? I can't do anything with this. I'm like, well, I can't do this. Like, I can't see this. She's like, well, okay, why don't we come to my office and we'll do the reading part. And she's like, and she basically told me that she wanted me to prove that I can read. And so I grabbed my magnification that was in my pocket and I read the thing. And of course it started off a little slow because it's not something I normally have to do. And then once I kind of got because I'm taking this, thing that's kind of the size of my phone and I'm going line to line, left to right. And I'm going all the way over and then I have to stop and then go over. But once I kind of got the hang of it, I was reading at a regular level like I always was. And, but it's like the fact that I had to be that vulnerable and had to be just like, it angered me. It saddened me. Like, it made me not want to apply for more jobs.
Right.
But I know if people like me aren't out there, people like your husband aren't out there trying, how are we ever going to make change for those down the road so they don't have to go through that type of experience? Because, there's many of us that are still going through it. And the reason why, yes, there's a stigma on the disability community that a lot of us are lazy and just want to collect disability. And that is something that is real. But that isn't the majority of us. That is some of us. But a lot of them, how they got to that point is because they put themselves out there and they went to these job places and they're saying, oh, haha, good luck. And, oh, we'll call you later. And they never do. Right. And they go through so many embarrassing things. Many of that I've talked about just in my life, what I've gone through with just trying to get a job. It's embarrassing. It's really like you have to do a lot of soul searching where you just like, man, like, do I want to do this shit? But also, like, do I want to be normal? Do I want to like feed myself? Do I want to be able to afford the things that I like? Do I want to just live with my family the rest of my life? And you really have to kind of go back and forth with yourself to try to figure out, what do you want? Do you really want to embarrass yourself and put yourself in this super vulnerable position and risk being sad and angry more than you already are to live a normal life?
Right. And I think that's, what you're saying is frustrating because, like, ultimately what you're always saying is, do I continue to sacrifice? And that's, you're constantly being asked to sacrifice some part of yourself to fit into what everybody else can just do. Yeah. And the people in charge are allowed to just allow that to happen. They're not making those changes. They're not, saying, how can we help this person do their job? Because that's their job, is to make sure that their employees are able to do their job. And you're having to carry all of this burden all of the time. And that's got to be wearing. I mean, it has to be constantly be like, all right, I got to walk into the situation and I know what I'm walking into and I know how they're going to react, but, I'm going to still try. And that means like every single encounter becomes that struggle, and it shouldn't be. And that's where the disability community really, has to come together and say, you know, it's not our job to make you comfortable.
Yeah.
Your job is to allow me to do my job. Your job is to allow me to live my life just like you get to live your life. And that's, you know, like the ADA got put in place, and it definitely is beneficial, but it should have been a jumping off point. And I feel like they just stopped to, yeah, well, we did that. We're good. Yeah. And it's not, there way more needs to happen, you know, within companies, within, you know, the government. They need to really look and say, what are we doing to address so that people with disabilities have the same chances of living, you know, a healthy, normal life as anybody else does. And that's on them, and that shouldn't be on you.
Yeah.
And that's ultimately, I think, where, you know, now we're at this day and age where now we need to see those changes happen, you know, in legislation. Companies need to step forward and say, we want this. We want to have your skill set, TJ. You bring a lot to the table. How can we help you, you know, so that we can have your skills come to us? Right. Instead of being like, oh, we're doing you a favor.
Yeah, like what you were
saying.
You
know, we're checking a box.
Like what you were saying with the sacrifice. Like it'd be like if you were just a person and whoever is in control of your life, let's just say it's God, and God comes to you and says, hey, do you want to be happy? And you go, yes. All right, cut off your big toe. All right, now do you want a good woman or a man in your life? Yes. All right, cut off another. Like you just keep getting rid of shit, and to the point where you don't have anything left. Because a lot of us lose our sanity, and we lose so much. We just keep sacrificing. We keep getting rid of so much that like makes us us. One of the things I've talked about on here is, you know, I have this big thing with my uncle, because my uncle and I, you know, he's a great guy, not a great guy. He's a cop. He's good at what he does. He's a very smart person. He's very good at what he does. But he's got this cop sense of humor, and he just says horrible shit. And again, I've taken it for 27 years up until that point. And one day we were just kind of bickering, and he just kept with this same old, because he was retiring, and he kept with the whole, you know, well, we're now on a fixed income. I mean, he's joking because him and his wife both make six figures. And, you know, and he just, and I was just like, okay, sure, you make plenty of money. And he said to me, well, we all can't just sit around and collect disability. And I said, you can't fucking say that to me. Like, don't. And again, this was in front of my grandma. And again, I had to apologize to my grandmother because I did not want to do this. But it hit me to my core, because I'm like, you're my uncle. Like, you say this shit to me, because and eventually it got a little darker and a little deeper, and we had a huge argument and whatever. But and then my grandmother eventually, because she's almost 90 years old, and she wants, one of the things in this world she wants before she leaves this earth is that she wants me and him to work it out. And right. And I said, I can't. And when she talked to him at one point, she said, what can we do to fix this? And he said, well, all he has to do is come and apologize to me for cursing at me. And I said, Grandma, like, you don't understand. Like, I'm a man. I will talk to him if he wants to have a fair 50-50. Like, you sit down one end of the table and we'll just have a real conversation. I'm not afraid to talk to him. But I'm like, I'm never apologizing to him, ever. Because I apologize to you because I wish you weren't there when I said that. But you don't understand what it's like to be me. And if I apologize to him, I have to sacrifice everything I stand for. Like, everything. I have to literally pretend, I have to get rid of all the strength in my disability and everything I've overcome in my life. And I have to tell a person that I'm sorry that I called you an asshole, and I'm sorry that I told you to go fuck yourself, because you told me and any person that has a disability that all we do is sit around and collect disability. I have to literally apologize to you just because I want my grandmother to have some sanity and some happiness. And that's the type of, and again, that's not something I will do, but I've done a lot of sacrifices like that. And that's what it's like to be a person with a disability. You have to sacrifice so much just to have a little happiness in this world. And again, I'm not saying it's all dark and it's all bad. We're just talking about these specific subjects, but you know,
yeah, no, and I, the thing is that they have to be talked about. They do. And that's why when I write about stuff, that's why I pick these hard subjects and put them in a book, because for so long I would try to say to people, hey, listen, this is really important. And I felt like I was on a soapbox, and I felt like I was just like irritating people. So I was like, I'm a good writer. One day I was like, I'm a good writer. Let me just take these things that I'm passionate about and let me put them into stories. And maybe then people can like read it and get a different perspective instead of looking at a disability or, a race or whatever, a certain way. Let me just make these characters, and this is what their lives are like, and express those things so that maybe somebody will pick up the book and they'll go, oh, I hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah.
Let me view things differently. Because you have to say those things. And whether or not you're saying by calling somebody an asshole who's being a bigot, or you're doing it in a way like I am writing a story and trying to have a character that's expressing what they've been through, it still has to be said.
Right.
You have to say those things. And if you don't, you're cutting out your own tongue. Like, you're preventing yourself from really expressing who you are as a person. And it's not your burden to bear. Like, it's not your burden to fix somebody's small-mindedness, like, it's your job to live your life. Like, it's your job to get up out of bed and, like, that's what you do. Then you go live your life, not to be like, okay, I have to make this okay for somebody else. I have to make them feel better about my disability. That's ridiculous. Like, people need to get over themselves and stop letting their preconceived notions about things determine how they treat another human being.
Yeah, no, absolutely. One of the things I want to ask, so your daughter, is that by the husband you're with now?
No, he's my second husband. So my children were with my first husband.
Okay, because I just wanted to know how. Okay, because I wanted to talk about how before you met him, but obviously she came first.
He actually didn't know her, that she had passed away before I met him. He helped raise my two younger children, but my daughter Kyla, who was one that passed from brain tumor, she actually passed away before I ever met him.
Right. Okay. Because I really want to talk more about her because she's obviously super important to your story. So obviously having kids and you have this whole ideal of bliss and I'm gonna have to take care of my child, and you don't really know what's to come. Like, you just expect you're gonna go into labor, you're gonna have a kid, and boom, like you start a new life. So obviously, like, was she diagnosed with this tumor, was she born with this tumor, or was she diagnosed later in life?
So she was diagnosed at 21 months old. She started showing symptoms earlier than that. I kept taking her to the doctor and saying, something's wrong. And, first they tried to give her glasses because her eye was slightly crossing. And then, she was walking with like a gait. It's a certain type of gait that she had from the tumor. And I said, and they're like, maybe she just needs to see an orthopedist. I mean, I literally went back and forth. And then finally, when she was like 21 months old, like, my gut's like, you've got to, like, you can't leave the office. You can't let them send you away again. And so I made an emergency appointment. I took her in, and, they're like, yeah, they're like, this is all weird. She was drooling a lot too. And they're like, oh, she's probably just cutting molars. There was always like an excuse for like whatever her symptoms were.
Right.
And then finally I was like, look, I understand that this could be this, or this could be this, or this could be this, but she literally has them all at the same time. And I actually was the first one that ever said brain tumor. I said, I think you're treating symptoms of something like a brain tumor. And as soon as I said it, the doctor kind of like his face kind of went blank for a second, and he excused himself and left the room. And I knew that me saying that put something in his brain. They came back and they ordered an MRI for her. Yeah. And so they took her in, and the next morning they were able to get an MRI and confirm that she had a brain tumor. But,
wow.
She probably had it for a while. So by the time they found it, it was already like the size of like an egg.
Right.
And it was in her pons of her brain stem. So it was one of those things where like, and I think a lot of parents probably with children with disabilities or special needs feel this, like, you feel like you're not being heard. You're like saying, hey, this is going on. This is going on. And doctor's like, it's okay, Mom. I mean, my husband says it. Like, he says he remembers going as a kid to the doctor, and something would come up and the doctor would be like, it's okay, Dad, or it's okay, Mom. Like, kind of like that condescending, like, whatever way about your child. Yeah. And I think, that I was young. I mean, I was 25 when my daughter was diagnosed. And, I was kind of just a kid myself. And I had come from a really terrible childhood myself. And I was really just kind of like stumbling through life at that time. So having kids was really wonderful for me. Like, it's something I really wanted. I had my first kid right before I turned 20. I had her when I was, I think, around 23. So I was really young, and this is what I wanted out of life. I wanted, to have children, and I really loved being a mom and stuff like that. But it literally turned everything in my life upside down because, I went in as a 25-year-old mom. I went in with a kid saying, please pay attention to me. And within like a day, I'm this 25-year-old mom who's telling them, this is what you need to do. This is how you're going to treat my kid. Like, I went from basically, not knowing what to do to having to be her biggest advocate, like, immediately, because she was young. She was, 21 months old. She passed it, 4.5 years old. And that whole time I was having to be her voice. Like, I was having to speak for her. I was having to fight for her. Whether it was inside the hospital or outside the hospital, I was having to basically be the one that stood between her and the world.
Did you have much time for yourself in a way of like, because again, there's all this, I'm sure it probably feels like it all happened so quickly and it all was so, I mean, again, she was only alive for 4.5 years. So that's terrible. Was it 4.5 years or 4.5 months? Did you say?
4.5 years.
Okay.
So she was diagnosed at 21 months old, and then she passed at like 4 years.
Right. But I mean, did you have any time to just cry and breathe? Because I'm sure it probably were a mess. Regardless if you were to let it all out, I'm sure to hear your daughter has a tumor and you see her every day and you get to be next to her and you get to see what is going on with her, and obviously, even if it's something that's simple or she's coughing, you probably automatically just assume like, oh my God, what is this? Is this the next step of death?
Yeah, I mean. Yeah. It definitely was like that, and I was a shower crier, so like I never really broke down in front of her because, again, I was trying to protect her from everything else because she didn't really understand what was going on. She didn't understand that she was different in any way, like around people. She didn't know she had a brain tumor. She was too young to really understand that concept. So her life, what she knew was just doctor's visits and her nurse that came once, twice a week. Things like that. So, like, I try to keep her life as normal as possible. So I put her in dance classes, and I had to fight for that. They didn't want her in the class because she would fall a lot because of her balance, but she loved it. And so, like, I had to pull the ADA on them. And it's like, hey, you can't tell me I can't bring my kid here to take dance classes. I can sign a waiver, but she's going to be in your dance class. I'm going to deal with it. Like, and I had to fight for that. That was, like, her favorite thing in life. Like, it's the thing I feel like I gave back to her. So, like, when she did die, at least she had something here on this earth that was, like, really magical. She loved to dance. So, it was hard. I mean, like I said, I was young, so like I just went through my days taking care of her and trying to keep things as normal as possible. And then my ex-husband, he'd get home. He was in the military, and he'd get home, and I'd go cry in the shower. Like I'd let him take care of her and go to the shower, and I would bawl.
Yeah.
That was how I dealt with it. And when I knew that she kind of leveled out and she did well for a couple of years. We went to like an alternative therapy in Texas. It was like a DNA therapy, and she did really well on that, but it was an FDA clinical trial. So it was something where like, they're still kind of playing with the numbers a little bit. And so, after about 2 years on that, I noticed, we all noticed kind of the increase of symptoms. And so we took her back in and the tumor had kind of like reactivated. Like it had started to kind of like deactivate, like show dark on the scans, and then it was showing light on scans. So we knew at the time that it was kind of picking back up again. And I mean, that was terrible. I mean, I was still just a kid myself, and I just, I, again, would wait till my husband was around, and I would just go and bawl in my bed, because I just knew I couldn't, I knew I couldn't win that battle, and I did all the bargaining with God or whoever you want to believe in. And I was like, please take me, do whatever.
Yeah.
And, ultimately it was a fight I couldn't win. So,
but on the flip side, though, I mean, if there is any positivity that has come from this, is, I mean, obviously you were kind of a lost 25-year-old for the most part. You were trying to just figure yourself out, and you have a kid, which you think is going to be like the next step to changing and having a better life, and
right.
She kind of made you a better person. She made you a stronger person because you had to advocate for her. She couldn't do it herself. Obviously, she was way too young anyway, but she's dealing with all this pain and everything that's going on with her, and you actually have to kind of step outside yourself and do more than you probably have ever done in your 25 years up until that point.
Absolutely.
It made you actually, not even just be a mom, but it made you empathetic. It made you just be a person who just won't take no for an answer. And you fought for 4.5 years until, obviously, unfortunately, she passed. But, it made you at least part of who you are right now.
Absolutely. I mean, it changed who I was as a person. Growing up, I was always that compassionate kid. I told my mother I wanted to be vegetarian at age 6. I was always that person that kind of like, saw the world a little differently than the kids I was around. And sometimes, like, if you think about things spiritually or whatever, I feel like my daughter came to me because she knew I could fight for her. Like, she knew I was that person that had already said, I'm going to fight for, people, I'm going to fight for animals, whatever. And so it definitely, changed me as a person. It made me, like, more willing to speak my mind, where, like, I always had the thoughts and the mind to feel passionate about things, but I was always pretty afraid. I'm hard to believe it. I'm somewhat of an introverted person. I really don't like to be put on the spot or in front of people. And, when I was in school, I'd be mortified if the teacher called on me, that type of thing. But, like, having a child and then seeing how quickly, like, the world will just disregard, especially children, I think, because, like, there's this mindset of, well, they're not going to have a life anyway. Like, it's like that mentality. And that's bullshit. Like, you don't get to determine who gets to have a life or how their life is, the value of their life. So it's one of those things, like, it pissed me off because almost off the bat, people were just like, well, she's young and she always have more children, or, or she doesn't even know what's going on. Or it was always like these, how they made themselves feel better about an absolutely terrible situation. Yeah, and so I started fighting back and said, you don't get to say that. Like, you don't get to tell me my child's life has value or it doesn't. You don't get to tell me what I can do or how I can make myself feel better. And so I definitely stepped outside of that shy girl I had been and really started, like, using the voice I was given to be like, I'm fighting for the rights of others. I'm fighting for what is right. Yeah. And, after she died, I went through a year of hell. Like, I just kind of shut down and I hermited it. But, like, after that year, I was like, all right, I have to use what I was given. And I opened a youth center, and we lived in a really poor town, and so opened a youth center in an old building and just started offering whatever classes I could, art, dance, whatever I could get, just to get, where kids come and just be kids and, like, get to have those experiences. And it kind of grew from there, like, where I was like, I became very passionate about, using my voice to help others. And it kind of just spiraled from there. I mean, to the point, like I said, I think I was probably pretty annoying there for a while on social media, because I was like, all right, this is an issue we need to talk about, And really, I was like, okay, I still need to use my voice, but maybe there's a way I can do it where I'm not chasing everybody away screaming.
Yeah. I mean, it clearly woke up, I guess, what you call a sleeping giant. Like, you were a person that, when your back is against the wall, like, you had to fight.
Right.
And that's a quality a lot of people don't have. They don't even understand that. And you sacrificed everything for her, and you completely forgot about, what you needed. I'm sure you probably could have been doing your nails and taking care of yourself, and you just said, fuck it, I got to take care of her. And again, that's why I said, like, there are people that you may never know what it's like to be your daughter, but just go through the pain or what your husband goes through, but you're the closest to a person who doesn't have a disability, but know what like to have one, because you had to be everything for your daughter. The only thing you didn't go through is the physical pain, but you went through all the emotional pain. Right. And who knows how much psychologically and how much wear and tear that did on your body because of all the stress and crying and all that shit. Who knows how much that just, damaged you for a good while. And again, there's always PTSD and there's so much you had to overcome at that point in time. So you just don't know. Sometimes, I've been figuring out some things that have damaged me over the years, and I'm learning 30 years later or whatever. I'm like, holy shit, like, that still has an impact on me. I never thought it did.
I think it has an impact forever, physically and mentally. I think that, physically, they've done studies and shown that, like, extreme grief or suffering or stress causes, like, heart damage. And, they've linked some, like, I have Hashimoto's, which is a thyroid condition. And they said they've seen in studies where, like, if you had a really traumatic childhood, you're more likely to have that, those type of things. So, we can't discount what mental health does to our body, because it does. It physically starts to break down things inside of ourselves, because it's all interconnected. We tend to treat mental health and physical health as two separate worlds, but they're the same world. It's the same body, Right. So I think that, it definitely, I've seen the wear and tear on me over the years from what I went through, as a child, like I really bad childhood. And then, I lost my mother at age 11. I lost my daughter, as a young mother, and then just the stress of everything else. But at the same point, I feel like I'm a more compassionate person than other people are because of what I went through. Like, I took all of those experiences, and it's like, you don't want people to go through that. You want to be able to take that away from somebody else, that suffering, that stress, because you know what it feels like. So you're like, what can I do to make you feel a little bit better, to be there for you, to offer something, even if it's just a listening ear. Yeah.
I mean, as a person who is going through a lot, and a person who doesn't know you that well is just getting to know you, even the conversation we had the other day, and including this one, like, if you're empathetic and you've been through a lot, you can pick up on people's aura and their energy and all that. And if you believe in that stuff, like, you can tell you're a very compassionate person. You're a very kind person. There's just a lot of pain. There's just a lot there to unpack, because you just feel it. I always hate these people that wear these shirts to say, like, oh, I'm a survivor of this, because, like, people who are survivors, they know you're a survivor. You don't have to put it on your shirt for us to know, because we can feel your scars emotionally and what you went through. And
I think most survivors don't feel like they're survivors. I think they feel like they're in that raft still. You know, like I think ultimately, like I don't feel like I'm like, yeah, I've been through this. I'm still like, man, I'm still like on that raft out in the middle of the ocean, just paddling away. You know?
Or we're like we survive whatever it is that almost killed us, but we're still surviving. Like we're still going
Right.
through whatever the next step of that. Like the disease that nearly killed me, I survived that. But I'm still surviving life. I'm still surviving my mental health. I'm still surviving my chronic illness. And
Exactly.
so yeah, no, I mean you can, because we are survivors and we are soldiers, we are fighters. But you know we may never ever stop fighting, and that's something we have to come to terms with. But one of the things I wanted to ask you, because you know what was your your final closing like feeling towards having to bury your daughter? Like was it a breath of fresh air in a way of like, oh my God, she doesn't have to suffer? Or did you go through just like, oh my God, I lost, the thing I loved the most in this world? Or both?
You know, it's both. And I remember like I had this weird epiphany, like when she was about a week out from when she passed away. And I just knew, like, you just know at this point that you can't stop the speeding train. I remember just laying on my floor in my room and I was crying. I was like, just give me her pain. Give it to me. Let me suffer, and it was like this, like, just let me go through this. Don't put her through this. And, she passed away and, I didn't think about that again. But like a few months later, I remember I was driving and all of a sudden it dawned on me, I'm like, exactly what I was given. I was given the suffering and the pain. Like now I carry all of this.
Absolutely.
And that's what I asked for. Like she was set free of what she was going through. She didn't know that she was going through it, but she knew that she didn't feel good sometimes, and she knew that, she had to go to the doctors, and she didn't like that, and she had to get a finger pricked, and she didn't like that. Like, she knew all those things she didn't like, and, like, she got set free of not having to go through all that. And I was left here carrying all the suffering.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in a way, like, it felt like a penance I was willing to carry. Like, I was like, all right, I'd rather have my kid, but, like, I'll take the penance. I'll take the suffering that means she does.
Yeah, because in the same token, you have all the time she smiled. You have the 4.5 years you have with her, but yeah, you still have to carry this pain that she's not here anymore and you can't talk to her.
Exactly.
And so, yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. But yeah, again, like I said, those are the type of situations that really make or break a person. And there's many variations and there's many forms of it. But when it comes to losing a child, especially at that young of an age, I'm sure you go through the gamut of emotions of anger and sadness, and at some point you get to a point where you're happy because you just go like, yeah, it sucks, I would love to hug her again and have a conversation with her, but you also don't have to take her to the doctors anymore. You don't have to see her cry anymore. You don't have to see her in pain. You don't have to read those stupid scans, and you don't have to feel the way you felt about those things. You can miss and still cry and think about her, but at least she's not in any more pain. And that's got to give you some sort of just reprieval, and just like you can just sigh of relief and like, thank God that's not going on anymore.
Yeah, and I think it's cyclical. Like I think and I'm sure you go through this too. You have those days where you're like, yeah, but I'm here and I can do this and I can whatever. And then you have days where you're like, fuck pissed, and I'm like, like whatever. And that's what it is. I think with losing a child and seeing her go through stuff is like, there are the days I wake up and I think finally, and I'm glad that I had a time with her. And I'm glad that I fought for her. I'm glad I was the person that I was, because I took a lot off her plate by standing between her and the rest of the world, between her and doctors. And I was yelling at a neurologist 24 hours before she passed away because I was refusing to let them just tell me. And I was like, we're gonna make sure we have done everything we can do. And I'm proud of that, and I'm glad I did those things. But it also sucks that I ever had to. Like, it sucks that she ever went through that, and like that this little kid that I had that was going to grow up, and my kids are adults now. She'd be 20, 25, 26 now, and it's like, it's one of those things where, like, I still think about that, like, because there's this gap between my oldest child, and then my next child. There's like a huge gap because, of course, she was in the middle, and so like, she should be here. When I'm hanging up stockings at Christmas time, I have her stocking. Like, it's these things where it's like, I'm always gonna feel sad about, the fact that she's not here and what she went through. Yeah. But I'm also really glad I got to know her. Like, she was a really amazing person, and like, she's impacted who I was. She taught me a lot about, kindness and stuff. Like, I remember, like, this nurse would come and they'd have to do her port. So she had a port under her skin, and they would have to access that with a needle, and they get changed out once a week. She hated it. It was like absolutely just a miserable experience for her. And this nurse was like her home health nurse, one time every week, and do it. And I just remember like this one day, and she just didn't want the nurse to do it, and she was screaming and crying and trying to fight her, and finally the nurse got it done, and my daughter climbed in her lap and hugged her. And it was just like that moment of like, she knew the nurse wasn't doing something to her. She knew that what she was going through, she had to go through, but the nurse wasn't causing it to her, you know, that she still loved her and she was still close to her. Right. And that's something I really hold with me the rest of my life. Like, I have to really separate sometimes the actions from the person. I have to look at, like, why is someone reacting this way? Why is someone doing this? And think maybe they're hurting, maybe they're suffering, maybe they're, you know, feel like they have to, and try to then approach it in that way. So if I don't agree with somebody, you know, I'll say to them, okay, you know, I definitely can see where you're coming from, but, you know, maybe consider this, or think about this. And I feel like my daughter taught me a lot of that. You know, her ability to separate what she was going through from the people around her, and understand they were trying to do what was best by her, and that they didn't intend those things, really taught me to kind of see two perspectives in every situation.
Right. You know, it's really weird, because every guest I have on, there's always something parallel or something that like is just like daunting in my life, where I go like, holy shit, like that like speaks to me in a different way, because I've had enough experience, especially with all this health stuff and everything. And, you know, and just kind of what you were just saying about your daughter, you know, I had a friend named Lori who I talked about, I was like episode 10. I just kind of told her story from my perspective. And I probably had about 4.5 years with her. And she, you know, she made it to about 21, but I only had about 4.5 years with her. And you know, she was, you know, constantly in the hospital. I'd always talk to her on the phone. We would just have fun, silly conversations and be just dumb and just have a good time. And there's a point where she kind of cut me off because she just didn't want me to see her in her worst state. And eventually, you know, we got back in touch, and I yelled at her, and of course I still regret it, but I had a real reason to be mad, but I also didn't know all the information. And so we got back, and once I found out like she was bleeding all over the place and she was just in a really bad place, she almost died a couple times. So then I didn't know where to, like, what to do. And so I eventually just called her, and we had one night of just like a 2-3 hour conversation. We just act like I don't know, again, I don't know if I'll ever have this strength again, but I had to pretend like everything was going to be okay, knowing that she was going to die soon. And just for the perspective to paint the whole picture, she died like 2 or 3 nights later. And we talked for 3 hours like nothing was wrong, and like we hadn't disappeared from each other's lives in months. And, you know, we just had this amazing conversation. The one thing I told her was, I'm going to do everything I can in my life to try to live my life for her. And not just for her, but, you know, when like what I do now, part of it is for her. Part of what I do is to make sure people like her stories get out there, because people don't speak for her. And, you know, she went through hell for 19 to 20 to 21 years of her life. She actually was a cancer survivor and died of heart failure. And she just battled and battled and battled. And it's like, she lived a very rough life, but she had great parents, and she had a great family, and she had me and certain people that just loved her unconditionally. And then she died, and she left a lot for us to pick up. And it's not to blame her, but you know, so I see like the parallels with your daughter, because I think I had about 4.5 years with her, and with Lori, and, you know, it's like shit. Like, I just kind of taken everything after she's passed, and she's been gone for at least 10 years now. But, you know, I just look at it. I try to keep her there, knowing it keeps me motivated. Obviously, talking to people like you also keeps me motivated. But I look at her and I go like, yeah, like I'm trying so people like her have, you know, an impact in this world, and so we can have more information, so that doctors don't tell you like, oh, everything's going to be okay, meanwhile she has a tumor. You know, it's just continuing to just, you know, we don't just need to educate the public, we need to educate doctors, we need to educate everyone, because people are struggling more than just financially and all that. People are battling all kind of health issues, and it's not all, like 99.9% of it has nothing to do with COVID. And I'm not again, people think I just attack the COVID stuff. It's just that's all we talk about. And we get lost and we forget about everything else. And there's so much more, so much worse out there. But, you know, and so like your daughter's story, it's like we can't forget these people, because these are the people that are, you know, they get lost in the shuffle, but their stories do matter regardless of how long it lasted, because it matters to you. It's like without her story, without her little 4-year journey in your life, who are you? Because you weren't
You know
the same
what?
person before.
Exactly. And you know what COVID is in the sense, like, it's to people, like, you know what it's like to go through stuff. I know what it's like to go through stuff because we've been going through it. The rest of the world was kind of just skating around, watching their television programs and not really thinking that bad things could happen. And that's why COVID's such a shock to people, because it's not a shock to you or I, because we're like, yeah, shit happens. Like, it does. Like, stuff shows. And like, for the majority of the population, shit has happened, you know? And so now they're shocked. And to me, it was just another thing. I'm like, yep, that's another thing. I have to precautions to do what I need to do. But like, I'm not really all that shocked. Not a whole lot shocks me. Yeah. Like, people say, oh, you know, such. I'm like, yeah, not shocked. Like,
yeah, when I heard the statistics were up, like, oh, child abuse and domestic violence is up because people are now home. I'm like, for a second, it was like, oh my God. And then I was just like, oh, of course, because this is humans. Yep. This is what we are. Like, instead of appreciating and enjoying the time you have more time with your family, you're like, nah, my family gets on my nerves. I'm going to beat them. I'm going to hurt them.
Right.
And it's like, man, like, this is where we are. And so, yeah, COVID, right. Like, it's a distraction from everything else. And it's, like I said, I'm not downplaying that COVID isn't a problem, especially for certain people who have health issues and bad immune systems and so on and so on. I'm not standing on any side for vaccinations or masks. I'm just simply saying I know it's a problem, but it is not a bigger problem than children going missing. It's not a bigger, it's not bigger problem than molestation and
it's not the only problem. It didn't erase other problems. And I think the problem is they didn't even think about those problems before. So like, it doesn't erase it for them because it didn't exist. Because people don't want to hear about. I mean, I can't say something like, and I used to do this test, like on Facebook, I'd post something benign and positive, whatever, kind of like, right? And then I'd post an article or something about something that was going on that maybe needed some attention. Nobody would like it because people don't want to hear about that. They don't want to hear about bad stuff happening. They don't want to, it hasn't happened to them, it hasn't happened to their kids. They just want to, it doesn't happen.
Right.
And, years ago, I remember I read this, it was like a parenting magazine when my kids were little, and it was like a letter magazine, and I guess they had run an article about a woman who lost her baby. And so she wrote an article about what it was like to go through that, and stuff like that. And the responses, instead of being passionate, were like, oh, I don't have to read that in my parenting magazine. Like, now you make me think about my kid. And like, it doesn't have to happen to you for it to matter. Like, you have to stop thinking, inside your box. You have to start thinking outside your world and think, it matters to me that somebody else is suffering. It matters to me that somebody else is going through this. That makes me a better person. But the problem is I feel like a lot of people do feel like if it doesn't happen to them, they don't have to think about it. They don't want it on the radar. They don't want you talking about it. And that's where I feel like you just talk about it more.
Yeah, it's like you yell words like cancer, and then people put their fingers in their ears and go, la, 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 I don't want to hear this.
Right.
It's like, dude, it exists. Like, we can't forget this stuff. Like, I'm not telling you to not be afraid, but stop watching the news. They want you to be afraid. They want you to be divided and just have your own identity, have your own ideology. Think outside the box and stop just stop being biased to everything. Stop watching the things that prove your points right.
Exactly.
Just have an open mind and understand that, like, you're not the only one going through shit, or you're not your life is, you're not the only one here. And it's just, it sucks because like this type of stuff just distracts everybody from everything, and it puts us so far back. And then when you think about like issues with like people with disabilities, not only does that get pushed back, it gets pushed back beyond the things that are already getting pushed back. Because it's whatever's on the news is selling. It's like, oh, look, Asian hate is now a big thing. It's like, I lived in Philadelphia forever, and I saw Asian people getting beat up all the time. It was
always a thing. It was always a thing, right. But the news says it's something, and then people listen for about a week. I feel like that's the other side of it. People, they want to get, like, riled up about stuff, but then they want to move on to the next thing to get riled up about. And so, like, has Asian hate always existed? Absolutely. My family, when I was a little girl, brought in a family from Vietnam. They were boat people during the fall of Saigon, so they basically were rescued, and people in America could like basically adopt them to come in and help them make their way here. And I saw it. I mean, I saw it because this little girl went to school with me, in North Carolina at the time. So, you definitely saw that hatred has always existed. The media says that people care for a week and then they move on. And the fact is, like, the Asians are still being hated on. People care this week? Probably not. Something else happened. And that's exactly what the media wants, because it paralyzes people from uniting and actually doing anything.
Yeah, because it makes people like it'll start dividing because then there's some people will say like, well, it's the white supremacists, and then it's no, it's the black people in the ghettos doing it, and this, and then it's all these like, oh no, fuck the white people, they're doing it more. No, it's the black people, and it's all this division, and we're not even, and we've completely forgot about the cause itself. It's like, okay, well, Asians are being abused now, Jewish people are being like, we just forget that we're abusing each other as people. We put all these labels on it, and like, yeah, they look a little different, but they're still fucking human. Yeah, maybe they
like
speak
here's a really right. Here's a really simple analogy. A car doesn't work unless the parts are all together. And the powers that be know that if we're all together, we're going to work. We're going to make this work. And if we don't, then we're just laying in that heap on the ground. And that's what's going on. Like we're being divided on purpose. Because we're divided, we don't work. We don't come together and make the system work. And that's unfortunately. Until people recognize that's why they're being like riled up, that's why things are being put out, and the words, even the way words are like, a headline is written, is to get people to react a certain way.
It's disgusting, yeah.
It's disgusting. I don't even watch it. It's like I literally don't. We don't even have like TV, and we have Netflix. Like, and I watch programs I want to watch, and I will not. I don't read the paper. I don't I don't like. I am aware of what's going on in the world. But I keep things in a very, very like kind of neutral state. Like I'll look to see what I need to read, so I'm aware of what's going on, but I don't let it saturate my life at all.
That's why I kind of understand the people who watch things like the Kardashians, even though I think that's shitty too. But like they just dumb their mind down so much because they don't want to see all the tragedy that's going on out there because it's just disgusting. Right. But something I said on a previous episode to a person was like, we like to brag that we're this like top of the food chain because we can do so much. But the reality is like we act more like animals than we do what we perceive to be as human. All we do is kill and rape and just judge and
attack and yep, we always have our teeth bared. That's what I feel like. We always have our teeth bared. People are just ready for a fight all the time. And like even on social media, like I really do social media for my books, and I keep in contact with my family. My family's in New York. Yes. Yeah, and that's really what I use it for. But like, if I start to scroll or I start to I end up feeling depressed. I feel disillusioned. I get angry, and I'm like, that's the problem with all of this. Is that's what it's meant to do? Is because it keeps us inert. It keeps us unable to basically take what we have inside our passions and find something to fight for. You don't need to fight for everything, but find something that you're passionate about and fight for that. Because if everybody did that, everything would be covered.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I end up, I know exactly how you feel. Like I've talked about this as well, just like going on Instagram and trying to find people with disabilities to interview. And I find some really amazing people, but I also find people on there that are just trying to use their sexuality to show off their disability and try to cover up the hurt and just because they're just going with the trends. And it's like, man, like, what are you doing? Like, as I said before, I think anybody who feels that they're beautiful and they're disabled, I think that's amazing sentiment. I love that. But there's a lot of hurt that I don't think they're covering up, and they're not real. Like the way they're going about it, it's like, oh, look at my ass. And it's like, yeah, man, like, look at my ass, but I have no legs. And it's like, dude, come on. Like, this is so gross. Why are you doing this? Like, you're a beautiful person. You're awesome. Stop listening to people who say you're an ugly because you don't have legs. Fuck them. They're not worth your time. You think the beauty is this, right? You think beauty is this defined thing that's put out there, into the world. Like, you have to, I mean, this, again, a conversation we have in our house, but, like, I don't believe in using sexuality to sell anything. Like, my husband, he's like, yeah, if you just show pictures of yourself, you sell more books. I'm like, that's not why I want to sell books. I want to sell books because my words matter. Like, it's important to me that people find it for the right reasons. Yeah. And, but that's the problem is, like, it is. I mean, the amount of sexuality that is based on insecurity and need for ego boosting or ego stroking is astounding. Like, I mean, if you try to get into anything, any group you find, you're going to find that in there. And that's frustrating because people don't realize you're beautiful because you're beautiful. Yeah. Simple as that. Like, doesn't matter what you look like, who you are. Ugliness comes from how you act, what you basically put out there. So if you're ugly, it's because you're an ugly person. Like you're putting out hate, you're putting out misery, you're putting out negativity. But if you're a person that is living with kindness, living with compassion, doing the best you that you can, you're beautiful. Like, it's simple as that. And I feel like we've been marketed to for, eons. As long as there's been marketing, we've been marketed to, again, because it keeps us in our,
It keeps us from feeling confident. It keeps us from feeling strong. It keeps us from feeling united. And that's going to continue on.
And having real conversation. Like years ago, these books would come out like 100 ways to please your man. It's like, well, why don't you just ask your man what he likes? Why the fuck are you reading what other women think about men? They're not men. So why don't you, when you ask like the perspective of that's the reason why we do have differences here. And it's just about having real conversation, just communicate with each other. And yeah, it's just everything is sold to, especially like I said, I feel more for women because men do all kind of dumb shit just for attention, but women, it's 99.9% of the time, it's just about their sexuality. And again, there's nothing wrong with sex. There's nothing wrong with showing your curves in your body, but it's just when you're just doing it for attention and this is the only way you feel you can make a living or this is the only way you feel important.
Maybe it is the only way. Maybe it's the only way somebody will pay attention to you. Maybe you have a skill that's amazing. You're an athlete as a woman, but for some reason, the only way as an athlete, as a woman, that you'll get any attention is if they get shots at you from behind with your butt. You know, like that type of stuff. Like you're still being put into this thing where it's not good enough to be an athlete and good at what you do. Now you also have to sell your body a little bit to get that marketing, to get that sponsorship.
Yeah. And that's kind of how I look at it with the disability community, where it's like, yeah, people all perceive us like we're all the same. Like what you were saying with your husband, how your daughter, they perceive them to be slow based off of whatever they were doing at that time, that they were like, oh, look at that. Yes, we all are different. And I understand why so many people in the disability community want to venture off and try to be their own thing. I get that. But it's like, if we don't come together, we don't show that we're a strong, united group and fight for all our causes, and then once we get their attention, then we show, oh, look, deaf and blind are completely opposite. Yes, they're similar, but they're different. You know, paraplegics, you know, people who have spinal injuries or you know, traumatic brain injuries or lupus or any of they're all different in their own way. Yes, there's many parallels, many similarities, but they're different. And we're all, and even if you both are blind or you both are paraplegics, they're different because they're different people. They have different stories. And that's what we need to do. But if we don't come together and we don't actually, you know, we are brave people. We go out in public every day knowing that people are probably going to look at us and some more than others. Like I can get away with it more because I can hide my disability more than others. Not that I try, but I can because I'm not totally blind. And because I have legs and I can walk and I function well enough to where people are like, oh, okay, there's nothing wrong with them until I look close at something. So I have some benefits, but still, I still get it. And, you know, we know that ridicule is there. We know people stare and it sucks, but you know what? It's like, fuck them. Like, who cares? Like we are great people. We do a lot. And I love the movements that are coming out of like Disability Pride Month and things like that. Like be proud of what you have. Because people don't understand, like, when you go through what we go through and the fact that we can still smile and we still get out of bed and we fight all the challenges of our physical disabilities and our mental disabilities, because we all have mental disabilities who have physical disabilities. I will guarantee that. And we every day we still get up and we still find something to smile at. I don't care if it's our pet. I don't care if it's a comedy or a show, somebody we love. We still find a way to smile even when we're in excruciating pain, emotionally or physically. And I don't understand. If you don't find that beautiful, then I don't know what the hell we're doing. Because, like I said, there's so many people that inspire me. And I go through shit myself. But it helps me get through this life because I know that there's other people that are just like your husband that are just trying. Like, there's nothing easy about your husband's life, but you make it easier. Your kids make it easier. Everything that he's going through, like he's just stronger, and he gets up, and he knows that tomorrow is gonna, there's gonna be parts of it that may suck. Maybe it won't, but he knows it's a possibility, and he still gets out of bed, and he still tries to smile, and he still tries to live a life, knowing that what could come, and that to me is beautiful because, the people that end up killing themselves because of this stuff, and people kill themselves for many reasons, but the people that are disabled that do it, as much as I hate that they did that, I also understand why they did it. I've been down that road. I tried to kill myself. I know what that's like. It sucks, and I don't look at them as weaker people than me. I just, I found my way out of that dark smog, that cloud that was over me, and I'm still in the cloud. It's still above my head, but I'm going away from it little by little. and they just couldn't because it consumed them. And I, like I said, it sucks.
Right.
And I don't, not that I want to just be completely dark about everything, but it's just, you have to talk about every reality that we go through. And, you know, it to me, it's beautiful that anybody that can just stand, even if they physically can't stand, they find a way to just stand for something, and they get up and they just, every day is a challenge, but they don't let it stop them. And like I said, that's always, to me, is one of the most beautiful things that exist in this world.
It is. And then, again, it's, you know, the fact that you have to fight for something that should just be a right is where the rest of us need to stand up and say, enough. Like, this is, you know, we demand equal rights. You know, all men are created equal, right? Like, that's in our Constitution. So, like, it's, you know, we have to demand that happens with women in our companies. We have to demand in our schools and say, you need to make this, you know, it's your job to basically provide these services, to provide adaptations, to make it that so that somebody with a disability is given as an equal chance to work, to live, to go to school, whatever. Like, it's all of our responsibilities. It's not your burden to bear, you know.
Yeah.
It's great that people with disabilities are coming together and standing up, because I feel like it needs to happen. You know, because otherwise, again, people will disregard because it's easier than to actually do stuff. But if you're standing in a mask, it's hard for people to disregard you. You know, when your voices are that loud, it's hard for people to just pass by. So I think that's ultimately why your podcast is important, why you speaking out is important, and reaching out to other people, because it does bring us together. We don't have to physically be standing together in order to actually have a voice. Yeah. We just need to be presenting and demanding and saying, this legislation needs to change. Yeah. You need to have this available to me at my job.
Right. I also think we got to stop having these cutesy little sayings like all people are created equal, because we know that's not true. But it's okay that we're not equal. Like, we want to be equal as far as pay scale and just, you know, treated the same and all that. Now, pay scale if you deserve it. Like, just because you're a woman and you make less than a man, that doesn't mean you deserve more than that man just because, you know, history says that women have gotten paid less. Like, if he works harder than you, then he should get paid more than you. But if you work on the same level and you put in the same effort or more, hey, you probably should get paid more. It's you know, again, it's always a balance. But, you know, yeah, people aren't created equal. I'm not created equal. I have shitty sight. You have more sight than me. That doesn't mean we're not equal, but we can find ways to be balanced and on the same level.
Right. Well, the equality should come from how you're treated.
Right.
You know, so the equality is, you know, you don't get to be treated differently because you can't see. Right. You know, my husband doesn't get to be treated differently because he can't use his right hand. You like that, you don't. Like, the equality comes from how we treat people. So, you know, how we create laws in this country, how we address this. I still feel like the thing that I feel about disability that I saw growing up and always said is it's still allowed to be very invisible. Like, you know, it's okay to totally not say hello to somebody who has a disability. Nobody seems to question that. It's rude as hell. Like, if you're going to say hello to anybody else or open the door and then somebody with a disability comes and you just kind of act like they're not there, you know, that's not acceptable and that should be called out. And I've seen it. I've seen, you know, the grocery store and, you know, somebody is walking in with their disabled son and, you know, they'll talk to the parent, like, and then just totally ignore that the child's there, but they won't do it with anybody else. They'll talk to everybody else. Yeah. I mean, how does that child feel? And I'm talking about children that are old enough, teenagers that are old enough to understand that they're being ignored by somebody. Like, that's really horrible that we do that.
Yeah. I also feel like we're always in competition with each other, where it's like if someone says like, well, you don't know what it's like to be disabled. You don't know what it's like to be black. It's like, yeah, I don't. But why don't you tell me? Let's converse. Let's talk about it. And let's not compare our stories, our war stories. Like, we can talk about it. We can say like, yeah, this is what's good and bad about being black or disabled. But at the end of the day, we're both going through shit. Everybody goes through stuff. It's just some people go through worse things. People have worse lives. Some people really have the deck stacked against them. But it's like, again, if we can come to terms with ourselves and figure out why it's beautiful to be what we are, and then we can reach out and try to help people that are similar or going through other things, and we can relate to others, even if I don't know what it's like to be black. I do know what it's like to be discriminated against. I do know what it's like to be treated less than another person. And it's just not because of the color of my skin. It's because of the way my eyes look. And that's still similar. And so we got to stop trying to think like our stories are the worst stories, because there's always someone worse than you. You know, there's a lot of people that are not here anymore because it was worse than what you went through. There's a lot of people that died and sacrificed everything so that black people could be free, so that disabled people weren't put in camps, and so that gay people could get married and all these different things. And they're not here anymore. You know, I always talk about Martin Luther King, not because it's corny to talk, because, you know, he's such a figure that everyone talks about. And it's like, no, we should talk about him more because he's probably the most quotable person that has ever existed. And he really was for people, all people to be together. And I know people try to point out history like, oh, well, he might have been cheating on his wife. He might have been. I don't give a shit about all that stuff. That's just a way to bring down his character because we're all human and we all make mistakes. I'm not saying he was a perfect person because he's not. But he was.
It's how people negate the positive things. They find negative things so they can negate the positive things. Throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right.
You know, and because when I know Martin Luther King Day came up last year, and people are like, "Oh yeah, but he did this," and I'm like, and that's true, and I hear it with Gandhi too, and I'm like, those things may be true, but it doesn't mean that the things that he did fight for or the positive didn't exist. Those are still important.
Right.
You know,
like Abraham Lincoln, he
about.
had slaves. It's like, yeah, but he freed them. Like, it was the time. People did shit because that's what they thought was right. And then they realized it was wrong. It's like...
Well, I'll tell you, if you really want to get to it, like, there are things in my life I wouldn't want, at the end of my life, if I did really positive things, there are things I'm not proud of.
Yeah,
I mean, there are. But I would hate for those things to erase the things that I worked really hard on.
Absolutely.
You know, too.
Yeah, but that's why I spread light on the things I put it out in there and I say, look, this is the shit I did. I'm not coming on here telling you that I'm just some choir boy and I'm just this amazing person. There's things I'm not proud of. There's things I hate about myself, or there's things I've done. And I've only done really one terrible thing in my life, and I've talked about it. But in general, I haven't always been the best boyfriend, or I've never cheated. I've never forced myself on a girl. I never did that. But I always haven't been the best person. Sometimes I've been closed off and whatever. And just because I present myself to the audience as a good person, I show all that. But I also let you know that, yeah, like I am a little fucked up because I've been through so much. And if I wasn't fucked up, that would be even more fucked up. Because if I can just take everything that I've been through and smile, that's really crazy. That's how you become a serial killer. And so I haven't always been the best person. And that's why I try to show you if I'm sad or if I'm angry, because it's real emotion. And I don't want to hide other parts of me just to come on here and say like, yeah, like that's the one thing I do. One of the things I appreciate about doing this is that I try to be as honest and raw as I can. That's why I don't do a lot of editing. I just let things play out the way they are, because that's the way it should be. Because when you start focusing on the theme songs and the music and the banners and all this shit, you forget about like the actual product itself. And some of these podcasts come on, it's like, well, I want a half hour where I want you to come on and tell me your whole story about your life, your husband, your daughter who died. I want you to tell that all in 25 minutes. Go.
It would be impossible.
Good luck. Like, and
not to show real emotion. I mean, you could do it, but you'd be reading off like a script and not really talking about how it impacts you, how it affects your life, and how it inspires you. I mean, what I've been through also inspired me to be a writer, inspired me to try to share my story, or things that I've seen, observed. So, it gives me a chance to really talk about the hard things. It's not easy to talk about my daughter. I don't tend to bring it up because it's almost as if I can't do it without Carrie. It's been a lot of years, but it doesn't matter. It's my kids. So, like, I still get really sad. So I don't tend to talk about that with people because, again, on a short podcast where it's like a quick 30 minutes, that's a big hole to start digging.
Yeah. And I'm not trying to shit on other people's shows. People do whatever they want. I just, like, for me, like, again, I genuinely, getting to know you, I genuinely care about you and I have love for you because I know what you have had to go through. And, in my own way, I can kind of project and feel what your pain. And it's like, I want to know about your daughter because she's so important and she needs to be talked about because, who knows about your daughter other than the people you've told. And again, like without your daughter, your story isn't as relevant. And I don't mean that in a mean way, but like your daughter really probably morphed you into more of who you are than anything else in your life, even though you've gone through other shit.
Oh, yeah. No, I agree. Yeah, absolutely. And it's why it's such a touchy subject because, the more it changes you, the more it matters, the more pain that comes with it. And that's definitely the most painful thing about my life. I went through a lot as a kid and I've gone through things, but like losing my daughter, hands down, is the hugest tragedy of my life. And it has impacted every breath I take. So it's important to talk about. And I appreciate having that explore, to talk about her, but it takes time. Like I can't just spit out a 5-minute explanation of my daughter.
Right.
It doesn't explain everything about her and how every single thing I do now has been changed because she existed and because she died. Both. Her death and her life both changed me. And so those are things that, I appreciate being able to talk to you. It's just painful,
Yeah,
for
of course.
people to talk about. So.
Yeah, all that hokey shit, like, oh, define your daughter in one word, all that bullshit. It doesn't, like, that's cute, but it's like, no, man. Like, sometimes it's hard to express a story just off a couple sentences. Like, you really just got to paint the picture. Like, that's why I always jokingly say the irony of me is I'm a very visual person. And I always try to paint the picture and try to put people in your shoes because I don't know what it's like to be you. I don't know what it's like to have a kid who died. I don't even have kids. But I know what it's like to be my mom's son and watching her watch me go through excruciating pain and watching her cry and watching her be strong. And so, but I also, not only do I want to just like listen and learn from you, I also want people to like hear your story because there's a lot of mothers that have either lost their child, will lose their child, or at least watch their kids suffer. And, the more people like you that speak out about that, it makes it more comfortable for them, even if it still sucks. It's like, well, at least I'm not alone.
And it was important to me when I was going through things with my daughter. It was important to me that, I could hear other people's stories too about what they had gone through. And when she died, I had mothers that had reached out to me who had also lost their children, and they shared their stories and they shared their, how they coped, things like that. And so those things really matter. Like having that voice and using it does help somebody, even if they don't tell you, like, even like, hey, that helped me. Just put it out there because it's going to land on someone who's going to think, wow, I'm really glad I heard that today. I can't tell you how many times like I've been just driving and something came on the radio and they talked about some story and like it changed my life. Like it was just a small thing, but like it made me think differently or maybe changed my path of existence. And, I went home and maybe decided to do something different than I was going to do. And that person didn't know that I heard that and felt that way.
Yeah.
But it was out there. And so that's what I hope to do too. I hope to do it with my voice. I hope to do it with my writing. It's just maybe they'll land on one person's ears and they'll be like, oh, hey, that means something to me. Yeah. I actually, for my books, yesterday, because it was something I woke up and I said, this is important to me. And I started writing organizations that get books into the hands of prisoners and being incarcerated because I was like, it's important to me because I could get onto the prison system and how much I think it's screwed up, but that would take me to a whole nother show. But my point being is, I feel like a lot of people in there need to be heard. Yeah. And so I was like, how can I get my books just for free to them so that maybe they can read something and maybe it will connect in some way. That's the thing is like just constantly pushing out there and saying, who can I reach? Even if I don't know I reached them, it's not about stroking my ego. It's about maybe by the time I've done my time on this earth, I've changed things enough to help somebody feel better about their day, not kill themselves, be kinder, whatever it is. Like I want to know that my life mattered to make things better.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up, we talk about your book. I do want to talk about one more thing, but I want to just kind of comment what you said because, about listening things and just kind of picking up. So like if you walk around with like an open heart and open mind and you just kind of, again, you don't have any biases and you just like, yeah, we all have things that we like more than others. And there's things that we have to kind of go like, oh yeah, I like this more because this is just what I like. But if you can take yourself away from everything and just walk around with really no conviction and you just go like, okay, and you hear stuff that just impacts you. And even if you don't fully agree with it, but you can understand how someone can go there, even if it's something really dark or whatever, or something you pretty much is heinous and something you completely disagree with, but there's a part in there you can take from it. Like, it doesn't matter where the source came from, because there's evil people that have said and done good things or said things that we all can relate to, but we write everything off because of the source. But there's so much out there we can pick up on, because I think one of the things that I really hate that what people do is when someone does something heinous, if they did something good in their life, we completely just say, oh, well, that didn't matter. And because we try to pretend like we're all good and we don't have this evil, and that these serial killers or these people that do horrible shit, they are the worst of people and we are so far removed from them. But that is not true. We are all very close to being those people, and we all have this good and bad in us. And again, I have had plenty of horrible thoughts, as I've talked many times, not so much anymore, but I've had to get myself out of that. I could have been a school shooter. I could have been, a horrible person if I wanted to be. It's just, I didn't go down that path. I fought through it.
Right.
And, like I said, if you just go through life wanting to learn and wanting to experience other people's cultures and just whatever, their pain, everything, just learn, whether it's documentaries, movie, you could pick up on stuff on the dumbest things. And if if you just have an open mind to everything, you're going to learn a lot and your life will continue to evolve as you go along. That's how I try to live. Because I really, there's things that hit me that I'm just like, oh, I'm literally listening to a sports show and somebody goes through an analogy or something. I'm like, oh, I could use that. I like that.
Right.
Something that I never even imagined because it's just stupid sports. But yeah, the one thing I wanted to kind of really talk about, you meeting your husband, how were you at the time? Were you open to wanting to get into another relationship? I mean, you have all this that's happened to you up until that point. Were you open-minded to getting into a relationship? And also, what was your initial thought of meeting this person who has this disability that's obviously very obvious? Were you open to dating someone with a disability?
Well, so it's interesting. Kind of how we met was through work. So it was, it wasn't a situation where I was looking to date anybody or anything. I started a job at a bookstore, a major chain, and he worked there. And I was actually at the end of my previous marriage that was basically falling apart. We were separating. And I wasn't really looking to date anybody because obviously I was coming out of a long marriage, I had children with, and, I was honestly trying to find me, which I think was probably good because, I lost my daughter. I was ending my 18-year marriage. I mean, I was basically really at a place where I didn't even know who I was. And that was kind of a weird place. And so Justin and I met, we both worked, we just hit it off. We became friends. And he was somebody that, mentally I connected with immediately. He just had a really open mind about the world. And he was also kind of exploring things, he was looking at different spiritualities and different things. And he was really into music. And it was one of those things where I kind of needed that at the time because I'd put so much time and energy into other people that I never really, explored things that I liked, that I was interested in, that maybe I would, so talking to him allowed me to start to open my mind and go, okay, maybe I want to listen to this music. Maybe I want to go to this place, let me look at that, spirituality or that belief system. So I think that's really how we connected initially is, we just became really good friends really fast. Uh-huh. And then, then it was just, we were just inseparable. It was one of those things where I can't really explain. There was never a moment where I was like, am I comfortable or uncomfortable? Do I or don't I? It was just we just bonded and went from friends pretty quickly into, we realized we felt deeper about each other. He was more closed off about that. And I think, growing up kind of where he did and how he did, being disabled was still kind of hide it if you can. So he would always kind of try to stand in a way or do things in a way that he would hide his disability. Uh-huh. And so he, I think I was probably maybe even more initially comfortable talking about it than he was because my daughter, had one and I just don't find it to be anything other than if you have brown hair and I want to talk about you having brown hair. So I think I opened that conversation up quicker with him than he did because I wasn't uncomfortable, but I think that was maybe surprising to him as well because people are more comfortable if you hide things. And, it's just something that I wanted to just address it and talk about it because it wasn't something that I felt needed to be hit, and so through our friendship, we would go hiking and we just talked a lot about things and eventually kind of came to the point where this is just a natural conversation. Just like when my daughter came to me and told me she was gay, it's her truth, not mine. So we just talked about it. His truth is he has cerebral palsy. It's not my truth, it's his. So who am I to say how he should or shouldn't feel about it? How he should or shouldn't deal with it. So the way I look at it is I'm here for you. You tell me, what you need from me. But I'm also not going to put it in a box. I will definitely have those honest conversations about it. Yeah. So, and then when we decided to date, it was just it was very, very natural. I mean, we just had hit it off so much that I couldn't imagine not being around him and not spending my life with him. So,
yeah, no, that makes a very strong bond and it helps. It's I guess it's a good escape from the world because again, everything that you've gone through and your daughter goes through and what he goes through. It's like when you're all together, not only do you have a great support system to come home to, because, one of the things that goes on in this world with the bullying, kids come home and they get bullied online. Well, it's like,
Right.
Your husband, you all have a place to come home where it's your safe haven, it's your safe zone, and you all support and love each other. But also when you go out into the world together, it doesn't matter what life throws at you, even if it impacts you and it affects you at that point. Like the person next to you loves you, and you have something to come home to, and you have this bond that most people don't have, regardless of whatever's going on in their life, good or bad. And it helps to, again, because you and your husband are great role models to your daughter, that how to treat people. If she's going through her identity of trying to, okay, she's a gay woman in this world, how does she navigate that? And just because you don't know what it's like, she could at least look at what your husband goes through, or what, your other daughter went through, and what you've gone through, and all these stories. And it's just, treat people equally and treat them regardless of what they look like or who they date. And, like I said, it's a trickle down effect from the family. Like everyone, you all kind of impact each other in different ways, and it helps to strengthen this bond that you all have.
Absolutely. I don't think you have to go through what someone goes through, or you don't think you even have to totally understand what somebody's going through to be compassionate, to be empathetic. I think that just saying this person's going through something is the step of saying, okay, it's going to be tough. I say it to my daughter, I say all the time, I'm like, the world is tough, but you're tougher. Like ultimately you're going to go through stuff. People are going to treat you like crap. They're going to, make fun of you. They're going to, even legislatively try to prevent you from having a life. But the fact is, like, you're tougher. You have this in you, and you can fight for that. And I feel that way across the board. So if you're somebody with a disability and you're talking to a person of color, you might have different things, but some of those challenges are the same. Some of those things you face are the same, and that's, you need to find the alike and not the difference, because the alike is what makes us stronger. It pulls us together and says, yeah, man, I've been through that. Like, I know what you're saying. I have your back. And I think that ultimately how we need to feel about one another. We need to have each other's back.
Yeah, absolutely. To kind of like wrap up here, like, why don't you just kind of obviously promote, but also discuss like your books and what you're trying to get out of doing these fictional books?
Sure. So I currently have 2 books out now. They were released in 2021. I have 2 more on the docket coming out this year.
Cool.
And then all of my books, I'm very passionate about things in the world, and I see people struggling. And I think that's, I can't put my finger on and say I care just about one of these things. I care about it all. So what I wanted to do through my writing was really like show points of view of some of these struggles that maybe people very quickly dismiss. So my first book, Do Over, deals a little bit with mental illness. The main character has dissociation disorder, which I really had a lot when I was younger, which is where a lot of times you just don't kind of feel like you're dying, or you feel like you're not in the space that you're in. Like, it's a really weird sensation. And I used to have it all the time when I was younger. I suffered really bad panic attacks in my 20s. And I was really, really isolated because of it, because it wasn't that I didn't care. It wasn't that, I didn't connect to people. It's that I would hit these moments where all of a sudden I wasn't there. Like, I wasn't able to really bridge a gap between me and other people. And so she has that. And, she basically puts her in bad situations because of this disconnection. She basically puts herself in a bad situation and ends up in another town 700 miles from there. She's made a bad choice. And so it's a beach town. She decides she's going to stay and try to restart her life, which she does a lot. She kind of has to constantly hit reset because she keeps messing things up. And the small town, she makes some friends there and finds out a lot of the people in their 20s are suffering from ketamine abuse. They're using ketamine. It's a pretty impoverished town. It's a tourist town, but, the people who live there just aren't, making the money. And so a lot of these kids kind of feel trapped and they're using ketamine. And so through that, she really connects with one of the townspeople, Smitty, who's a lifeguard, and finds out his story. And through the story, basically, it finds out that he kind of is a catalyst for a lot of the problems there. And, but then it goes into his life as well, and like his childhood and what led him to make some of the decisions that decision made. So I address like drug abuse and that, and mental illness and even prison, that one. And then the second book I published last year, We Don't Matter, gets into like police brutality, church abuse, homosexuality, kind of basically gets into a lot of like hot button topic issues as well. The main character doesn't know that he's gay, but, you know, kind of through the story realizes he is, and then realizes, you know, he's a filmmaker, that he has to really use his filmmaking to have a voice and expose some things that he's seen, including police brutality and the church.
Yeah.
I have a book coming out, I think I mentioned this earlier, in May with Adelaide, and that has a deaf dog handler. And so it's basically a search and rescue team. And the main character is a paramedic there, and this deaf dog handler comes in. And it's really kind of about, you know, being on search and rescue, but it's about a lot of things they're bringing to the table, too. Him growing up being deaf, he was adopted, just being bullied in school, and it kind of gets into all of that. And then she has some trauma she goes through. And so I tried to, in all of my stories, address like something, whether it's drug abuse, having a disability, you know, going to prison, having a mental illness, because I feel like all of us have something that we're carrying, and those people that say they don't are really just fooling themselves, because we all have, you know, we all have a trauma or mental illness or, you know, something that we're dealing with. And maybe we're self-medicating with wine every night, you know, make us go to bed, whatever it is. We all are basically, you know, dealing with something. And if we can see that we're alike and we can be there for one another, I feel like, again, and I brought this up in my books, we could, like, if we would stop seeing each other as so different, constantly fighting against each other, I think that we could see a community that our children would thrive in, you know, that we would feel as well.
Yeah, I think what you're doing is not only super important, but I think what's great about it is that so many of us are trying to find representations of us. Like, you know, again, you always hear a lot of like black people saying like, oh, there's not enough black superheroes or whatever. Like you're giving people characters, fictional or not, there are people who can relate to them. And, you know, you're like, okay, there's someone like me out there that's in a book, even if it's not real. It's like it's someone that's like them, because some people don't have any of that. You don't really, you know. I reached out to the one guy that I hope someday we can talk is the guy who's on Breaking Bad, who was the kid with cerebral palsy, and and it's like I would love to get a hold of him, because he's such a great representation of not only people with cerebral palsy but just someone with a disability, because he actually has that condition, and he not only is that, he's a great actor. And he just, you know, he was so necessary, but they didn't have to put him in the show, and he was just great. But he's a huge like reminder of like there are people, like there are some people that have cerebral palsy and look at that kid and it's like, wow, he's my idol, because he's on a show, one of the greatest shows ever.
Well, we watched that show, and you know, of course, my husband has cerebral palsy, and he's like, oh yeah, you know, and talk about it. We didn't realize he actually had it. I always look up. I'm the person who's like watching a show and I'm going through to look up like the cast, and I looked and I was like, he actually has cerebral palsy. My husband's like, what? Really? Like, I could see his eyes light up. Like, it was awesome. Like, he was like, they actually cast somebody with cerebral palsy to play somebody with cerebral palsy, and like that was huge, because my husband also has a little bit of acting bug. He's like, you know, sometimes I'd like to like try to get into stuff. He's like, I feel like now maybe they would consider it, and that's huge, because when I first met him, he's like, they would never consider it. His view on the world has changed since seeing something like that. Like, maybe they would now consider casting me, you know.
And that's another thing that made that show so authentic and so great, regardless of all the subject matter and all the crazy things that happen in it. Not only is it one of the greatest shows ever, but it made that show so authentic, because they thought of real things. They used real science. They, you know, of course, there's some stuff that's a little fabricated here and there, but they put so much thought into it. And the fact that they even put themselves in a headspace to say, hey, you know, we want to give him, you know, we want to make this character, the Walter White character, Bryan Cranston character, we want to make his life so tragic. And okay, so he has a son who has a disability, and he, you know, he wants to take care of him and try to figure out how to make his life better and get him through college and all that. Well, we can't. We actually have to hire someone with a disability, which they didn't, because most people don't. Right, and they did, and that's, you know, that's so great.
And the thing that they did, and I try to do in my writing, is they didn't make it a trope, and they didn't make it like over the top. And you know, I've had these conversations with my kids. It makes me crazy when somebody puts a gay character or a character with a disability in, and that is the sole thing about that character. They don't have any development as a person. They don't have any interest. Like, they're just the gay character. They're just the disabled character. Like, they forget to like make them just the person that they are, and like we live in a world and everybody's different. You know, there's no two of us that are exactly alike, whether it's through our experiences, our mental health, disabilities, club, or our skin, we're all different.
Right.
And yet, like, it's so easy for them when someone says, oh, we should have a disabled character, and they just throw that character in there, but that character doesn't have any development. They're not talking about their workday or their hopes and dreams or their relationships. They're just the disabled character. Right. So when I was writing, I really wanted to make sure that these characters are people first that happen to have whatever challenge they're dealing with. So they're dealing with mental illness, but dealing with disability, they're dealing with drug addiction. That's not who they are. Who they are is who they are. Your soul, your being, and then what you're dealing with is that. And so that's when I write, I try to hit that first.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what I don't want somebody walking away feeling good because there was a disabled character. I want somebody walking away and going, well, that person has the same desires I have. They hate their job too. They, whatever it is, they don't like Brussels sprouts, whatever it is. Like, I want to make sure that what people are getting from it is that we're alike.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's, again, what that show did, because they focused more on him being a teenager boy. When he wanted to change
they did a good job.
When they wanted to change his name, and when he changed his name just because he was mad at his dad, and what kind of food he liked, and his relationship with his parents, and there's obviously a lot of tragic things that go in there, but they rarely focus on his disability at all. And even when he's drinking beer and his uncle's just talking to him and he's giving him beer, and then there's obviously a lot of drama that comes with that, but there's rarely anything they're talking about his little walker, his crutches. They don't talk about it. They just treat him as a regular character, and that's what you do in your book. Right. And that's why it's like I said, it's so what you do is so necessary, because I think everyone thinks they have to do a certain thing to advocate or to make a difference. You have to be out on the front line, and you have to be yelling and screaming into a bullhorn and saying, we won't take this anymore. You don't. There's so many ways now. Like, you don't have to just do a podcast or a YouTube channel or write a book. You could just, there's so many ways you can really make a difference.
Every action you do, exactly. Every action you do every day is a difference. And I say all the time, like, you don't have to wave your flag, you just be present. Which means, like, you don't have to be sitting there saying, look what I'm doing, I'm advocating. You just have to be advocating in every action, every thought throughout your life. So if you see something, you are there and you're present to be there for it. So whether or not, it's signing a petition or waving a flag or protesting, or it's as simple as, reaching out to school and saying, what do you have, so that these students would have this accessibility to this, what do you have if you have a blind student or a student that has, sight issues? Do you have magnifiers? Do you have things that help them? Like, being present and just offering those suggestions, standing up for legislation, being a decent human being is probably the number one thing you can do. Just be a decent human being. Like, if you just aren't the person that's whispering and pointing and you're just saying, hey, good morning, how you doing today? I learned basic sign language. I worked in retail for years, and I realized we had a lot of deaf customers come in, and they were trying to find products. I worked in a gourmet grocery store, and they would come in looking specifically for things, and I could see their frustration because nobody could communicate with them. So I had learned the alphabet back in junior high school, and so I refreshed myself on that and learned some basic words so that I could at least help them find those products, hand spell, and figure out what they needed. Like, just being present in your life and realizing, like, we all have things we can do. And you don't have to, like I said, you don't have to be the person with the megaphone, because the person with the megaphone is loud, but they're not always changing things.
Nope. Yeah. Sometimes it just sounds like noise. Just like, okay,
right,
shut up.
Yep. Like, thanks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Like, did we cover everything? Because I know you had a lot to talk about, but I don't know if we covered everything.
I think so. I really just appreciate the open format. I do best when we can just kind of chat about things and,
yeah, me too.
Talk about my book. So, and why they're important to me to have written. I hope that people find connection with them.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like I'm on a soapbox. Try not to be.
No, you're fine. So, I just like having real dialogue. That's why, like, when people, I talk to them in the beginning, I'm like, just don't worry about where the conversation is going to go, because I don't know. And I know I'm technically the host, but I don't have questions written down. I just want to talk to the person, and we'll flow. And because we have our stories are connected in one way or another, and we'll I'm compassionate and empathetic enough to try to understand what you're going through and try to throw out decent questions enough to keep the conversation going. And again, it's like you're a writer, so you know how to put words out, and you can talk, and you have a story to tell. And the reality is we're talking about your life, so you know it better than I do or anyone else does. So it's just a conversation that flows and it's natural. And I think that's what's really missing from all cultures now, or forms of entertainment, where we just, when you look at the news, you look at anything or any of these, political shows, that's just people talking over each other or waiting for the other person to stop talking, didn't listen to what they said, and then just go right into their point. And we're not learning from each other.
Right.
We're not talking. And again, we're not allowed to have different opinions. We're not allowed to, speak our minds about real things. And we're not, like, people may speak from hate or may say something, but it's like, well, let's figure out why, like the source of that. Why do they feel the way they do? Let's not censor it. We have to figure out where they're coming from, because just because they say something that is egregious and we don't agree with it, that doesn't mean it's necessarily wrong or right, or it shouldn't be spoken about, because we want to know where it comes from. Everything comes from some place. And maybe somebody's just in a lot of pain and they just need someone to just talk to. Instead of just writing it off as just evilness, who's to say what we do is right and what they do is wrong? And again, we all have our theories on that, but let's just, like I said, let's just have the conversations, put everything on the table and say, okay, I'm here to listen, and here's what I have to say, as long as you're willing to listen. And that's just
absolutely. We all start as babies, and we all start kind of into a world with a completely open mind. And, a lot of things come from hatred. A lot of things come from suffering or fear, and I think when we have those conversations and we hear each other out, sometimes people even hear themselves saying it and go, oh, wow, I didn't realize it kind of sounded like that. Or, if you're able to converse with people and really listen, a lot of times you can understand where they're coming from. Maybe they don't even know they're coming from that place. I think you and I had that conversation last time where you were talking about, you were saying something and all of a sudden it dawned on you, it came from a family member. Like you were kind of repeating what you had heard as a kid. And like, I had that too. And I think we all do. Like you almost have this rhetoric that you repeat, and then one day you go, oh, wait, if you have a chance to say, that's like my dad talking, like that's my grandpa talking, or whatever it is. And like, so if we're not having those conversations with each other, we're not going to come to those revelations. And the point is to come to those revelations and to say, ultimately, what is our end goal at life? It should be kind. I mean, it should be that we're there for one another, because we're all dying. Like no one's getting out if you're alive. So what is your end goal? Is your end goal that you live a hateful life? Is your end goal that you try to make life better? Let it decently. Even if you're not like out there trying to change things for the better, if you're not trying to make them worse, and if you're not spouting hatred, that's okay too. Because at this point, we just need less hatred.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I think what you do is very necessary. I think you're an awesome person. I'm glad we can talk, and I hope we can keep in touch outside this. For sure. For sure. I've enjoyed talking to you. Same here to you. And like I said, I genuinely have a lot of love and compassion for what you go through or what you've gone through. And I really am sorry what happened to your daughter, but I'm also happy what you turned into, because you are an awesome woman. And, you're just, like I said, I keep saying it, but you're very necessary to not just my cause, but just putting some good into this world, because we fucking need it. There's not enough. There just isn't. I agree. And without people like you, we're never going to make progress. And like I said, I thank you for coming on and sharing your wonderful story.
I appreciate it. And if anybody wants to connect with me, I'm pretty open. You can go to my website which is authorjulietrose.com. I have links to email me, to my Instagram. I'm always willing to talk. I am somebody that wants to be there. So, if anybody just wants to connect on any level, they can reach me through that site.
Yeah, I will. Like I said, whenever it'll be a while, but when this episode does come out, all her links, including the books, will all be in the description. And again, thank you for coming on.
Awesome. Thank you so much, TJ.
Yeah, and we'll talk soon.
All right. Bye.
All right, bye. What a great conversation, guys. What a fun conversation. I know it was long, so I don't want to babble anymore. But yeah, guys, I hope everything is going good for you guys. And just as I keep saying, keep your head up, and thank you for all your support. Take every day by day. I know that's cheesy to say, but these things are cheesy because they get overused, but they are true. You really do have to take every day as its own, and stop looking what's going to happen tomorrow, because you just don't know. You may not wake up tomorrow, unfortunately. Again, I hate to keep trying to paint this like dark narrative or these dark pictures that, like nothing, there's no sunshine at the end of the tunnel, or no light at the end of the tunnel. There's no sunshine out there. There is. It's just, you have to know what else is out there. You have to know your enemy. You have to know what is possible. But you guys, you hang in there. If you're all doing well, be grateful for that as much as you can. Just keep fighting out there and just trying to do nice things for others. And, I'm sure some good things will come back to you. And, we'll get out of here, and we'll see you next week, guys. Bye-bye.